What you are watching right now is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical theater that fades from the news cycle by Tuesday morning. This is the real thing. The United States has launched its largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Two carrier strike groups, F-22s, F-35s, B-2 stealth bombers, AWACS, thousands of Marines redeployed from the Pacific, and now interceptor drones flooding into the Gulf by the tens of thousands. And as of February 28, 2026, the bombs already started falling. Operation Epic Fury, that's what they named it, as if naming a war like a Hollywood blockbuster makes it more digestible for the American public. The United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, military infrastructure, and leadership. This is not a hypothetical. This is not a think tank scenario paper. The war is happening right now, and most Americans are only getting a fraction of the story. So let's talk about what is actually going on, because you deserve to understand the full picture. Let's go back to where this story really begins, because nothing in geopolitics appears from nowhere. It was late December 2025 when Iran's currency collapsed. Not a gentle slide, but a catastrophic freefall. Iran's rial went into a death spiral driven by decades of sanctions, mismanagement, corruption, and an economy strangled from every direction. The shopkeepers of Tehran's Grand Bazaar, people who have been trading there for generations, walked out first. Then the protests spread. By January 8th of 2026, Iran's government had cut all internet access to the country. Think about that for a moment. An entire nation of 85 million people digitally blacked out while security forces were shooting protesters in the head and torso. Human Rights Watch documented the pattern. Coordinated lethal force, not crowd control, but targeted killing. Iran's government put the death toll at just over 3,000. Human rights activists counted at least 6,000. The real number, because of that communications blackout, will likely never be fully known. Now, Trump, watching all of this unfold, saw a moment. On January 13th, speaking in Detroit of all places, he told Iranian protesters to keep going, that help was on its way. That's not a throwaway line. That's a signal. That's a president telling the world that Washington sees this as an opening. And from that moment forward, the military machine began moving. By late January 2026, the buildup was already the most significant since the Iraq War. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarine assets, long-range strike capabilities, all of it pouring into the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. Military flight tracking data showed over 120 aircraft deploying into the region within just a few days. Analysts watching this in real time said it clearly. The United States was doing everything it would do if it were going to attack, not preparing for diplomacy, preparing for war. And diplomacy was happening in parallel, but barely. Oman, as it has done so many times before in the quiet back channels of Middle East diplomacy, was serving as mediator. The Omani foreign minister was shuttling messages between Washington and Tehran. Talks resumed in early February 2026, but the gaps were simply too wide. Israel was making clear privately that it assessed Iran was stalling. Netanyahu, in his public statements, was pushing the position that Iran cannot be trusted to uphold any agreement. Washington, for its part, had a list of preconditions that analysts described as tantamount to a document of capitulation. You don't go into negotiations with preconditions like that if you genuinely want a deal. You go in with those preconditions if you want the talks to fail on Iran's shoulders. So the military option has cleaner political cover. On February 28th, the strikes began. The United States called it Operation Epic Fury. Israel called its component Operation Roaring Lion. They hit nuclear facilities, military infrastructure, leadership targets. Trump went on record confirming it, saying the United States had begun major combat operations in Iran to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, and that Tehran can never have a nuclear weapon. Iran responded the same day with a substantial retaliatory strike against American military assets across the Middle East. Explosions were reported near military installations in Iraq, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Oman, and the UAE. Iran was not sitting still. Iran was hitting back and hitting hard. Now, here is where you need to slow down and really absorb what happened next, because this is where the strategic picture gets both fascinating and deeply disturbing. Saudi Arabia, a country that has quietly, carefully, and always with extreme caution navigated its relationship with both Washington and Tehran, found itself intercepting roughly 60 Iranian drones launched toward its eastern region in a single night. 60 drones. The Qatari armed forces were intercepting incoming missiles. American service members were being killed, at least 13 dead, roughly 140 wounded. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a public threat towards Saudi Arabia, warning that any entity providing logistical support to the USS Gerald Ford carrier group would be considered a legitimate military target. They were sending a message not just to Riyadh, but to every Gulf state that had quietly opened its airspace and its bases to American operations. This is the architecture of how a regional war spreads. It is not one big explosion. It is a series of smaller explosions, each one pulling another actor into the fire, each one raising the cost of staying neutral. And right now, the Gulf states are discovering that there is no such thing as neutral when America and Iran are at war in their backyard. The economic consequences are already being felt. Iranian strikes have hit oil facilities in the UAE, targeted Saudi Arabia's Sheba oil field, and damaged Bahrain's only oil refinery and key desalination infrastructure. Think about what desalination infrastructure means in the Gulf. It means fresh water. Iran was not just attacking military targets. Iran was attacking the infrastructure that keeps people alive. And then there is the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point that every global energy analyst has nightmares about. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through that narrow waterway. Iran has, for decades, held this as its ultimate leverage card, 20 miles wide at its narrowest point, bordered by Iran on one side and Oman on the other. And right now, the United States is scrambling to build a multinational coalition to keep it open. Trump personally called China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the United Kingdom to ask them to join the effort. Japan said no, Australia said no, and China condemned the war, warned of consequences, and called for diplomatic resolution. What China did not do was join Washington's coalition, because why would it? China buys Iranian oil. China has deep strategic interests in not seeing Iran dismantled as a state. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi was at the Munich Security Conference warning that any war involving Iran would have consequences across the entire region. Beijing is watching this unfold with great strategic patience, and it is not going to make Washington's job any easier. Now let's talk about what this war is really about under the surface, because the official narrative, stopping Iran's nuclear program, is only one layer of a much more complex strategic calculation. One analyst put it with remarkable bluntness. One of the real objectives of the United States is to stop the oil that Iran and Venezuela export to China. Iran exports roughly 1.5 million barrels per day, most of it going to China through various shadow fleet arrangements. Venezuela adds another 800,000. Together, that's over 2 million barrels a day of sanctioned oil fueling the Chinese economic machine. When you understand that framing, you understand why the United States abducted Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro in January 2026 in a special forces operation, a mission that killed Venezuelan and Cuban security personnel, and why Iran's oil infrastructure is now being systematically targeted. This is not purely about nuclear weapons. This is about choking off China's energy supply chain. This is about great power competition playing out in the most volatile theater on earth, and the cost is already spiraling. The Al Jazeera Center for Studies published an analysis making a point that doesn't get nearly enough attention. This war is draining finite American military inventories, Tomahawk cruise missiles, precision-guided munitions, anti-ballistic missile defense systems. These are not things you restock overnight. Every interceptor fired in the Gulf to knock down an Iranian drone is one fewer interceptor available if things get hot in the Pacific with China. Every B-2 mission over Iran is wear and tear on the most expensive aircraft in the American arsenal. The military-industrial complex will profit enormously. Raytheon, Lockheed, General Dynamics stocks will be through the roof. But the actual operational readiness of the United States military is being degraded in real time. And the people raising this alarm are not peaceniks. They are senior analysts at establishment institutions who understand that the core long-term strategic competitor for the United States is China, not Iran. Meanwhile, in the United States Senate, Democratic senators are emerging from classified war briefings visibly shaken. Senator Richard Blumenthal walked out of a Senate Armed Services Committee session and told reporters he was as dissatisfied and angry as he had been in 15 years in politics. He said it plainly, that the United States seems to be on a path toward deploying American troops on the ground in Iran. Senator Chris Murphy confirmed that officials could not detail any long-term plan. Think about that. The United States is already at war with Iran. Americans are already dying, and the people who are supposed to provide congressional oversight are walking out of classified briefings saying they have more questions than answers. The American public is being kept in the dark about the objectives, the cost, and the exit strategy, if there even is one. On the ground, the human cost is staggering. Since February 28th, at least 1,444 people have been killed and over 18,000 injured in US-Israeli strikes on Iran alone. These are not abstract numbers. These are human beings, some of them soldiers, some of them engineers at nuclear facilities, some of them civilians caught in the radius of munitions that never land exactly where planners say they will. Meanwhile, the Iranian government, or what remains of its functional command structure after leadership has been targeted, continues launching retaliatory strikes across the Gulf. The IRGC and Hezbollah are coordinating. The Houthis in Yemen have declared solidarity. The popular mobilization forces in Iraq are signaling readiness to enter the fight. This is Iran's strategic doctrine of resistance unfolding exactly as Tehran designed it. Not one frontal army that can be destroyed in a decisive battle, but a web of decentralized forces spread across 5 countries, each one capable of raising the cost of American operations. And here is the deepest irony of everything you are watching right now. Iran had protests, genuine mass protests, driven by real economic desperation and real anger at a regime that had failed its people. Those protesters were asking for change. What they are getting instead is a war that has handed the hardliners in Tehran the one thing that every authoritarian government dreams of in a moment of internal crisis: an external enemy. Nothing consolidates a population around a regime faster than foreign bombs falling on their cities. The women who marched under the banner of woman, life, freedom. The shopkeepers who walked out of the Grand Bazaar. The young people who wanted internet access and jobs and dignity. Every one of those grievances is now secondary to the simple question of national survival. Washington, in striking Iran, may have inadvertently done more to save the Islamic Republic than 3 decades of sanctions ever did to weaken it. The Marines are heading toward the Strait of Hormuz right now. 2,500 of them, redeployed from the Western Pacific, from Okinawa, which means the Indo-Pacific theater is being thinned out to fight a war in the Gulf. F-22s and F-35s are flying escort missions. B-2 bombers are on standby. 10,000 interceptor drones are being deployed. The USS Gerald Ford and the Abraham Lincoln carrier strike groups are in the Arabian Sea. And the question that no one in Washington has answered cleanly, not to the American public, not to the Senate Armed Services Committee, not to the world, is what the end game looks like. Because Iran is not Iraq in 2003. Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. It has mountainous terrain designed by geography itself for guerrilla resistance. It has 70 years of institutional preparation for exactly this kind of conflict. It has nuclear material already dispersed and buried in hardened facilities that satellite images show have been reinforced with concrete shields since the last Israeli strikes in 2024. This war is not going to end cleanly, and the American people deserve to understand what they have been walked into, because the decisions being made right now in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in Tehran, in Beijing, and in Moscow are going to shape this century in ways that will outlast every politician currently holding power.